but it's nice to be welcomed. Before I start, I obviously want to thank, I'm very honoured to be asked to give this opening plenary paper here, and thank you very much to Tamsin and the committee for inviting me. And just to give you a little bit of local information that might be useful for you. We have an arts festival going on at the moment, which is Galway Arts Festival, International Arts Festival. If you have some time, there are very good exhibitions. There's a big statue exhibition down in a place called the Claddagh. Go and have a look at the guy. I brought my grandson and he's still overwhelmed at seeing a giant. If you partake in Guinness, which is not a sin, what you do in moderation, this is insider knowledge, every night in the Galway Rowing Club, there is a free music event and nice Guinness. So if you look up the Galway Rowing Club, I don't get a commission. Although if you see me there, you can buy me a pint of Guinness. What I'm going to do over the next 35 minutes, I hope, is stimulate the conversation more than anything. And I'm going to share kind of a view on things a little bit, and some of that can be challenging. And so I'll give you a heads up that some of the things I say may be a little challenging, but it's all in the spirit of the speakers who eloquently ahead of me talked about, particularly the importance of society and where society is going. And that's something that I'm very aware of, both in my role with UNESCO over the last 20 years and my role here at the university, but also as a human being, as a person. And without getting over autobiographical, I'm going to reflect on some of that. So I'm going to speak for about, I remember being at a conference where somebody got up and he kept turning pages when they were speaking. You had no way of knowing when they were going to stop speaking. So I'm going to let you know, I'm going to stop speaking in about 30 minutes. That's on the advice of my children, by the way. Anyway, I'm joking about that. So to start with, we're not better to start than Albert Einstein. And I'm going to give you a gift, apart from telling you where to go for a libation, which I've already done later if you wish. I'm going to give you, Albert, at the end of today, I'm going to give you the gift of Albert Einstein's formula for happiness and coping. It's actually his theory, but I prefer his formula. So I'm going to give that to you at the end. And in the opening, you heard the importance of us as a social science research community having the capacity to be able to translate our messages into messages that people will understand is really important. So as Albert Einstein said, if you don't really understand something if you can't explain it to your grandmother. When I was doing my PhD, if we had people in for dinner in our house, my wife would, to get them to go home, my wife would either show photographs or say, get Pat to tell you about his PhD. Same effect. So the importance of having, joking apart, the importance of having real world messages is key. And we are now increasingly challenged through online and offline attitudes to an extent that is quite worrying how that defense has been pushed in a way that's not good, as you, I'm sure, would agree. So with my great colleague here in the university, with Professor Carolyn McGregor, who's a professor of social work, she and I have spent a number of years working on a publication, which I'm glad to say is coming out in a new edition, Support and Protection Across the Lifecourse. And I'm going to show you a model in a while that we use in that social work students and sociology students certainly are finding useful. But let's begin with empathy. I make the statement that empathy is powerful, but with caveats. And we will look at some of the caveats later on. But being an empath is hard work. You can get things like empathy fatigue. You can even get false empathy. But the most important thing, the good far outweighs the bad. Empathy and compassion is our life currency. It's how we care for each other, and it's how we cope. And we're going to look at the link between social support theory and resilience theory and empathy, which is something that I'm really, really motivated about for many years and interested in. But one of the big things I want to say to you is that we often think about empathy as individual, one-to-one. We will look at that. But empathy is also societal. It's a societal responsibility. It's a societal social good. So using Brenner's ecological model, which I'm sure you all know, a social model, we're going to look at that a little bit as well. So the core things I'm talking about are empathy, social support, and resilience, and society. Jimmy Whittaker, many, many years ago, highlighted the importance of relationships in social science. And he very eloquently and neatly described it as the bread and butter of success in working with or for others. And if you look at social support and enlistment, which we're going to look at, if you look at how you enlist social support in your own life, how you bounce back or any of us are resilient in our life, it's usually as a result of yourself or somebody else actioning empathy in some shape or form with you or for you. It's a very simple concept as Pinheiro talks about it, but it's also a very complex concept. So I'm saying there's a really strong connection from research that we've done with UNESCO Child and Family Research and Centre here in Galway, and at UNESCO, and particularly work I'm doing at the moment with the University of York. We're looking at empathy as actioning compassion and changing society. And with Jed Mears, great colleague, and Professor Simon Mullen, we're looking at anti-empathy, which is now really rising, the anti-empathy debate, and looking at how you debunk some of that. And not least the confusion that people make between well-being and empathy. Well-being and empathy are two completely different things. If I was to ask you, can you think of a political leader who has absolutely nothing wrong with his well-being, but shows no empathy? You can get it pretty quickly what I'm talking about. What I want to do is talk a bit about the fantastic Janusz Korczak, and our friend from Poland will know immediately, or Henryka Goldsmith. I'm working with Anna, Professor Anna Oda-Coates in a university in Warsaw on the story and the incredible life story of Janusz Korczak. So Janusz Korczak was a pediatrician and a social worker and led an amazing children's home where children voted on the staff back in the incredibly way ahead of his time. And he very sadly, in the end, he was Jewish. And you should look up his life story. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm not doing the man justice here. And I'm involved in a society in Warsaw with Anna. But amazingly, in the end, the children in the children's home were Jewish. They were being taken to Treblinka. And he said, if they're going, I'm going with them. He went with them and died with them in the Treblinka, the gas chamber. And they said, no, you don't need to go. You're not really that Jewish. And he said, no, I'm going with the children. It's the most complete act of empathy you can think in your life. But the reason and his life story is really well worth looking at. But what amazed me about him, which actually was already said here, he said one of the problems with social research and social science is that whereas theory is really important, philosophy is very important, and social justice is very important, but they can't overrun the importance of human relationships. And the problem is that, as I will point in a moment, we won't run the risk of over-intellectualizing some of these things. And they're getting lost, not for any negative reason, but they're just getting lost in translation. So engaged research is an interesting topic that a namesake of mine, Dr. Dolan, is researching. And engaged research is about that human capacity to make research real world. So let's look at social support. Betsy Tracy and Jimmy Whittaker, they defined it in 1994 as responsive acts of assistance between human beings. Very simple, just responsive acts of assistance. And it's automatically assumed by most people. If I was to ask you how many lifts in a car did you get from your mother or your father growing up, you wouldn't have a clue. It just automatically happened. We automatically support each other. But having said it, we should note the fact that for some people who are in distress, or some people who feel hatred towards others, they don't have automatic social support in their lives, which is one of the reasons that it prompts them to feel like that. But generally speaking, it's automatically assumed. Sometimes that goes wrong. I loaned a neighbour a lawnmower a while ago, and automatically I gave it, and it came back in 4 pieces, which had to get repaired. So it doesn't automatically work out every time, but it is an automatic function for most of us. From a social science perspective, it's a proven buffer to stress. If you have social support in your life, you not alone are better able to cope with stress, you're less likely to experience stress. It's very interesting. And that comes from early World Health Organization research and the work of the great John Cassell back in 1974, 76, 78. In Ireland, we like a cup of tea, apart from liking Guinness. We like tea. We drink a lot of tea. So I use tea as a model to understand social support. So T is tangible, practical support. E is emotional support, and A is advising support. If I was to ask you for people who work with other people in education, in social work, in sociology, in researchers, social researchers, policymakers, what's the one type of support they give tons of that's useless? Which one? Tangible, emotional, or advice? Advice. They give buckets of advice and not always useful. And very importantly, for many people, the importance of emotional support, believe it or not, is even more important than any other kind of support. I'll come back to that briefly. Work that we've done with Dr. Carmen Devani, a great colleague in the centre, we did a lot of research where we researched veterans of social science research, and including the brilliant John Coleman from the University of Oxford. People that had years and years of experience of doing social science research. Bernice Weisberg in America, amazing, Robbie Gilligan here in Ireland, amazing people. And the one factor they said from all their social science research about interventions, policy, right across the board, including theoretical concepts in sociology and social work particularly, what they all said is relationships are key. Relationships are absolutely key message. And if you think back to when you were in school, can you think of a teacher that was good to you? Yeah? Put up your hand if you can think of a teacher that was nice. Okay, put down your hand. Can you think of a teacher that wasn't nice? Yeah, more hands went up. But we remember people for the way they make you feel more than anything. Brilliant research on children in care by Mike Steen from York, and I should think the other person was Rob Chaskin in the University of Chicago and colleagues, and like Mark Courtney. They researched young people who had been in the care system and went back to them many years ago. Fantastic longitudinal stories. And they could identify one person in their experience who had that made them feel good, and their outcomes were better. So all you need is one. I'm going to be autobiographical, and I'm conscious I'm online. I'm conscious that you don't know me, but this is an absolutely true story. So I'm the youngest of 10. I'm from, actually not a Galwegian, I'm from inner city Dublin. And Dublin against Galway in sport was a bit like Spain and France last night, but Dublin lost lately. Anyway, our children are Galwegians. But I'm from inner city Dublin originally, and my father died when I was 7 months old. He was a carpenter. And my mother was left with 10, the youngest of 10, I was 7 months old. My mother coped, brilliant woman, amazing woman, coped brilliantly through life. It was only in my adult life that I learned that a local shopkeeper, a man called Phil Nelson, who's long since passed away, allowed my mother run up a bill for a woman and 10 kids for 4 years. Now, with due respect to shops that are here today, you would not get that kind of social capital. So if anybody asks me to give an example of active empathy, that's the example that immediately comes to my mind. And we didn't even know we did it. So active compassion is key, and it cannot be undervalued. This is from a movie Up. If you haven't seen it, go and see it. It's a great Walt Disney movie. But anyway, One of the things we're researching at the moment, I'm doing it with the International Duke of Edinburgh Awards, is the connection between civic engagement and empathy. And I would argue it's an unused tool and not researched enough by researchers. So there's loads of evidence, for example, that people who experience adversity, if they can be engaged in their own community as volunteers, they actually do much better in their lives. A great example of that is a local soccer club where homeless people are the stewards in the soccer club. Brilliant example of how you can do that. Karen Petrona and Niall Bulger in the US, they describe this as the power of hidden support. And they've done a lot of research which shows that support which is hidden is far more effective than support which is shown. So those of us that made communion or confirmation or bar mitzvah or whatever in the room, you remember the aunt who gave you the money and made sure everybody else in the room saw her or him giving you the money. That's not hidden support. Look, I gave Pat 50 euro. You know, it was the aunt or uncle who discreetly put it in your hand is the one that you thought of more. So hidden support is really important. I love showing this. A colleague, Professor Eamon O'Shea, here in the University, is a social gerontologist. He's done a lot on Lifecourse research and intergenerational research. So this is from the Irish Times, and the boy was squelching with the glass of buttermilk. Buttermilk is very sour. It's not like ordinary milk. He thought it was ordinary milk, and they were at an intergenerational day. You see the older people in the background. You can see them in the photo. They're laughing because they knew what buttermilk was, and that's his grandmother who gave it to him. That's a great expression. So sometimes we over-expect support, and that's a negative side. There's nothing worse if you really need money and you need support, and you don't get what you expect. We haven't researched the negative sides of social support. And I say that with due respect to Saracen and Karen Petrona and all the people I've worked with over many decades, we haven't researched enough the negative impacts of social support. But we do know there are 4 qualities to support that we really need to keep in mind when we're researching it: closeness to other people, respectful admonishment. What I mean by respectful admonishment is respectful criticism that's done in a positive way, which is tricky, but can be done. The importance of reciprocal relationships, so you don't feel beholden to the other person, and durability. Durability is stickability, someone who stays with you through thick and thin. If you think of all the research we do in social science aimed at enabling better well-being for people or enabling people to overcome resilience, which I'm going to look at in a moment, the one thing you want is that they have somebody in their life, at least, that they can depend on, that they know will be there. And if we could do research that enables that to happen, I think that is powerful. And the other thing is to remember that within the 4 qualities of social support, timing is everything. How many people do you know, including yourself perhaps, that had a bereavement and you had floods of people coming to you at the time of the funeral? Maybe too many people nearly. And 6 weeks later, you're looking at the wall and nobody's calling for a cup of tea. So timing of social support is key. So Piniero's research has linked together the importance of self-regulation, cognitive skills, and this empathy and supportive relationships framework. But what's interesting, Piniero looks at it not just from family, but also from the perspective of professionals. And the argument in his research is that not enough young people are being hugged in care in a safe, positive way. There's not enough human connection, and that needs to be pushed back. And very quickly, just remember, social support is in the eye of the beholder. How you perceive it is really important, is more important than what you actually receive, what you believe is available to you. And it's not necessarily the case, as researchers often push it, that in social science, social support research, the more supporters you have, the more support you get. That's not true. The evidence is actually the opposite. Sometimes 1 or 2 can provide all the support you need. So range is key. What's interesting is that in John Bowlby, in 1950, when he wrote the famous attachment book, he looked at the connection between social support and social empathy. And social empathy theory, more laterally, has come from the works of Kirsten Neff, particularly, and others. But he looked at the connection between social support and social empathy, and the importance of integration by theorists, that they're not integrating these concepts, which that was back in the 50s, which is a long time ago. He highlighted the importance of one reliable alliance in life, and that's key. So this is from the book I mentioned by myself and Professor Caroline McGregor. We've created this framework called critical art, and this applies to sociologists, social workers, community development workers, educators, researchers, is the importance of careful analysis, strong reflection, and then thinking, rather than just going straight to the I know what to do. Very simple process of detailed examination of an issue, reflection on what you're learning, and then thinking. Think about that when you're writing, if you're writing a journal paper, proper analysis, good reflection, and think about it before you write, rather than jumping in and just citing research. Basic framework, and we see this as a kind of a life course menu. Andreas Barth is even more simple model. He calls it the presence model. And it's about really being there for the other person, being free to listen to them, being open, attentive, being connected to what they're talking about, being open to changing your own opinion, the change perspective, being available to, being patient and time, which is not my best quality, as my family will tell you, being patient, giving time. As my mother said, you have 2 ears, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. It's a good principle. Being loyal and dedicated. But you think of how often are researchers, practitioners, policymakers, politicians aware of those things. Even in our own lives, how often are we aware of it? How often have you been with somebody you love and they're talking away to you and you're miles away reading the paper, and they say something crazy to you to see, are you even in the same room? So being present is key. So now I want to move to resilience, and then I'm going to bring it all together. Is this okay the way I'm doing this? Is it making sense?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So there's been a huge body of research. The origins, as you probably know, of research on resilience and the origins of the concept really came from Michael Rugger's work and the work at the end of World War II by lost children, basically, at the end of World War II. And was very, the early days of UNICEF and UNESCO was very strong part of the research agenda. But described as bouncing back, all the theories there are on resilience, there's loads of names for it, but it's about overcoming adversity in the face of extreme difficulty. And you use your own stickability resources, and you use the social support of others. But often when we think of social support of others, we don't think about society. Support from society is a really interesting, concept. We think of immediate family, community, schools, the immediate ecological environment. We don't think enough around society. In Ireland, I think, when the crisis in Ukraine occurred, that we showed, we helped Ukrainian neighbours to be resilient in how they were received here. I don't know if that resilience or that kindness has stayed enough. It's a question. I don't know the answer to that. But it is that's an example of how society can respond. Another example would be during COVID-19, one of the projects I'm very involved with my close colleague, Professor Mark Brennan, and fellow UNESCO chair at Penn State, we train young people to be researchers. We have a youth as researchers, not the subjects of research only, but actually we train them in research methods. And we did if you look up UNESCO, we did a COVID study, and one of the most you know, in the depths of before we had the vaccine for COVID and all those Zoom meetings that we all, I don't want to give you flashbacks to all that, but when we were imprisoned in our attics, which we had to be, we reached out online to look for 200 volunteers to train young people to be researchers, to research other young people on how they were coping with COVID. And in 2 days, we had 6,000 applications, 6,000 online. So when people say young people aren't willing to volunteer, they are. So there's a lot been written on the individualization of resilience as an individual contract between people and families, between families and communities. But it's and it's interesting with the increase in AI, the way the AI phenomenon now and how that's impacting people's resilience is a very interesting question. But it's noteworthy to reflect that Grace Abbott in Chicago 100 years ago, with her sister Edith Abbott, who also was a social worker, they talked about resilience, actually, and they talked about community resilience in Chicago, and they talked about societal resilience. So it's not that it's something that has just been cooked up since the 1970s and 80s. Mike Nunger's work really highlights the importance of serendipity or chance. And from my own biographical story that I gave, you can see the way an accident or a chance event can determine a life. And we often forget about the fact that we think of problems that people and communities face as something that occurs over a long period of time for people. It doesn't. It can very often be an immediate issue. Many people are one pay packet away from having a problem. So we need to think about these things. But I really like the idea of ecological or societal resilience, how we can come together as a society. So one of the biggest, I think, it's not a criticism as such, but I certainly think it's a challenge. Alan Clark in 2008 did over 50 years research on the evidence on resilience. Massive body of work that they produced almost 20 years ago now. And it's amazing to me that if you look at the number of people who've researched resilience, and yet still there are some researchers who are now saying that this is really only coping. Resilience doesn't exist. It's not really about resilience. I would argue the evidence is overwhelming that resilience is very real, and resilience is an absolutely thoroughly proven concept, and far more than just demeaning it to think of it as just about coping. And there's a whole load of research. Sometimes the criticism of resilience has not been founded on actual research. It's founded in opinion, which we have to be, as social scientists, I think we have to be cautious and careful in this regard. There are 4 key understandings that Anne and Alan Clark highlight. Resilience can be crushed in the person, can be crushed in a community, can be crushed in a society, can be crushed in a country. It's not notional, it's very real. And they argue not to subject it to intellectualization, which is really interesting. But they also said being resilient in itself is not the antidote to social problems. And I want to highlight that really strongly. You know, there is an argument, if you've been very bad and seriously bullied, do something about the bullying, as well as enabling you to have better coping. Do both things. Don't just do one. And as Anne Maston, who's done brilliant work on over decades on resilience, highlights the 5 R's. And these are important in our own lives as much as they are in our need to be resilient. Being responsive to the other person, relationships again, reciprocity, give and take, and the importance of basic ritual and routine. Think of the ritual and routine you did to get here. That's all part of what we do. It's when you're inside your ritual and routine. Ritual is Christmas, whatever, birthdays, all these things we celebrate in life, death, births, all actually associated with food, which again, Mark Brennan and I have looked at the connection between empathy and food. It's another study we're doing. So in every culture, food has a role in empathy. It's another conversation. But all these things are really important. So we've looked at social support, we looked at resilience. I've done this kind of broad sweep opening around empathy. I want to focus, just to finish up, a bit more closely on empathy. So, and I'm saying this with absolute respect to Kimberly Crenshaw and, you know, the framework of intersectionality, which is now just over 30 years old. But I think there is intersectionality in a form between functioning social capital, particularly functioning human social capital, and civic engagement. I think these things, without being too negative, I think if you put it the other way, for people who are lost in communities, who don't feel they belong, who feel they're being othered, if you think about these feelings and the lack of social capital, and then the lack of capacity to want or be engaged civically, I mean, you know, so um, an obvious starting point for people working in any area of social intervention, nursing, medicine, teaching, social work, youth work, and so forth. I was youth work. When we think about it, obviously, in those contexts, we need to think about empathy as having a role in research, empathic researchers, which doesn't affect bias. Engaged research, social science researchers who do research for social good. And bluntly, who don't just do it for paper citations. I've been really crude here, but you know, there is an issue for me a little bit around that. And it applies equally to policymakers, people who, and governments, and people who are in leadership. So it's not just about those indeed of services. And why would we do this? You know, why is empathic action so important? Well, there are four key benefits. By the way, we've been involved in looking at empathy from an education point of view, and including it in school curriculum. And with success, we have it on the curriculum in our schools, secondary schools. So every child, teenager in secondary school in Ireland learns empathy, and you can learn empathy. Absolutely. And actually, one of the benefits of learning empathy, if you don't believe it the other way, is that actually you get better grades. I learned that from our colleagues in neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist. I trust them. That's a joke. I trust them better. But the four benefits are: it opens up new relationships, if you demonstrate empathy towards the other, towards the community, towards the society, if you demonstrate empathy to the other person, the only person who benefits more than the person you've shown empathy to is who? Who benefits more? You do. Absolutely. Even basics. It enables reciprocity of social support, give and take. As Christian Neff says, it increases your own esteem and your external esteem. And you get respite from focusing on your own problems. It's not just about you. You get that respite. And what's really important from the point of view of this conference, this community, this network, I think it's about this idea of trying to enable socially just societies. And I would, very respectfully advocate very strongly that I think this is important. That's for you, for us, not you, for us as a community. Myself and Mark Benham wrote the World Youth Report for UN Youth Office in 2016, and we've just done two follow-up papers on the role of empathy in civic society for UNESCO, and they're working papers which are up on the websites. So the work, and to highlight Charlotte Sitz, my colleague Charlotte Sitz, brilliant leadership on this. But having done a systematic literature review on empathy and education, having done it because we had to do a randomized controlled trial study on a program we designed with teachers and young people themselves. The four components of the empathy recipe in schools are understanding empathy, practicing it, overcoming your barriers to empathy, and all of us have barriers to empathy, overcoming the barriers and putting it into action, doing something for somebody else. And that's the core curriculum. I'm minimizing it, of course, because of time and everything else. But we're using that now there. We're about to use it for two other forums, which I'll share. But I would argue that's a recipe for yourself. It's a recipe for those you work with. It's a recipe for a research community. It's a recipe for social policy. It's those four simple steps, and they took a long time. And we have many publications on this, but as a core, I think at least I hope it works. So you get protective resilience for the marginalized if you have empathy, but you have to practice it in interactions with others. You have to consider your barriers. Sometimes those barriers are very challenging. How do you show empathy to somebody it's very easy to show empathy to those that are near or similar. How do you show empathy to somebody that's not? But the idea is it brings you to a point of social good. So even though I'm emeritus and my family I should stop working, which they're probably right, continue to do some work. And I'm doing some work with the International Duke of Edinburgh Awards program, and particularly with UNESCO and Penn State. So that core empathy menu, we're now bringing it to new avenues. So we're developing, and thanks to a very generous funder, we are establishing a UNESCO Observatory for Empathy and Engaged Citizenship. It'll be a global, to be given UNESCO's role, with Penn State University are leading on that. Professor Michael Donovan in particular, and Professor Mark Brennan and Max Crowley. So the idea is to create an observatory that has research, policy, practice, and societal interventions as an observatory. So that's something that's very exciting. And the other that will then feed into this idea of a global human skills forum, which is in part been led by Martin Hutt Brown, the Secretary General of the International Duke of Edinburgh Award Programme, and I'm working as chair of the research group on that. They want to develop this idea of human skills as opposed to AI skills, human intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. And I say opposed, it's not AI, we've crossed the Rubicon with AI. I'm not, my grandchildren are probably going around with robots. I don't know. I don't know where it's going. I mean, but we all know, I'm not being negative about AI, but the idea is to retain what's human is really important, and human intelligence and human skills. And human skills are compassion. They're all the things we critical thinking, all the important things. And not to see it as either of those ventures as individualized constructs, as in something that we're developing for individuals, but to see them as actually something that we see as ecological, getting back to Brofenbrenner's model of the right out to the chrono, right out from micro, meso, macro, and so forth. So I'm saying it's the micro to the macro across resilience, social support, and empathy. So to finish up, I was very fortunate in my Fulbright to be awarded a visiting fellowship with the Fred Rogers Institute in Latrobe. Hands up in the room who's ever heard of Fred Rogers? Oh, great, quite a few, yeah. Well, there's Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's a movie with Tom Hanks where he plays Fred Rogers. If you want to get a quick speed up on who Fred Rogers is, not a great, but it's a good movie. Goodish movie. But Fred Rogers was just an amazing human being. He was actually a pianist, he was a musician, he was an educator, and he was the forerunner of Sesame Street, if you know Sesame Street, children's television. Amazing man, and I was very fortunate to work with his archives. And there's a very funny story I'll tell very quickly. When I was going to his archives, I found a letter, and I thought when I was working with Dana Winter on Mark was working on the archives, we thought we'd be wearing white gloves, when you're working with archives and air-conditioned rooms. We were blowing dust off boxes and as puppets, and there were some people from the US who were crying because they knew it wasn't on Irish television, so I didn't identify with it, but it was obviously Canada and Northern America. There were people crying, some of the Americans, when they saw the trolley and things like that. But this is absolutely true. We came across this letter where Fred Rogers lived in Pittsburgh, and he was just an incredibly, he was an empath, an amazing man. And even if you look at the documentary on it, it's brilliant. But anyway, he went out of his house one day and found that his car was stolen. And it was all, who could possibly steal Mr. Rogers' car? All people. And about 2 days later, the car was returned with a box of candy and a note from the 3 teenagers, which said, Mr. Rogers, if we'd known it was your car, we never would have taken it. I was looking. But he was asked to name his 3 principles of empathy. And he just said, they're very simple. Be kind. Be kind. Be kind. And a great example of this in action is the Children in Care Choir in the UK that I've done some work again with the University of York on. And this is where young people in care use the community of choir and singing. My wife's I'm like into music as well. My wife's very involved in choir. Choirs are a community, and they use it as a tool of voice for life and care. Brilliant way of doing it, isn't it? Absolutely, just a brilliant example of it. And it's an ecological approach. It's not about them being care leavers, care users. It's about them as a community integrating with others in communities. Choirs connect people. And here's your gift before I go. So I have to say about the gift before I show it. So the story goes that Albert Einstein in 1927, I think it was in Hong Kong. And the gentleman who was working in the hotel helped Albert Einstein put all his luggage into a taxi. He was rushing to an airport. And Albert Einstein went to his pockets to give the guy a tip and realized he didn't have the currency, he didn't have money. So he said to the guy, get me a pen and paper and I'll give you my formula, my mathematical formula for happiness in life. And he did it. This is what he wrote down. And I think this is good for all of us as you begin into the conference, particularly if you go drinking Guinness, this is good for you. A calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness. I love it. A calm and modest life gives you more happiness than running around pursuit of success with constant restlessness. And the other part of the story is it was written on, a bit of headed paper from the hotel, and the grandson sold the note on auction for 1.6 million. He's got a calm, honest life. Anyway, as we say, Gurmina Mohammed, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So, And So, first one, so lives have not been able to. That kid. Uh, Sure. Yeah. Asked what two, and actually three. One was have police on bicycles, not in cars. Two was better street lighting, and three were somewhere we can have a coffee. And that they did those three things to begin with. It's a great study, actually. Yeah, they weren't costly. Some of the police people had to get fit on the bicycles. It was a bit challenging, you know. But I was delighted. It was a lovely project to work on, actually. I spent days going around on the it's the only time I ever cycled on a tandem. It's great doing research going around the bicycle. Hi. Yeah, different space. Yeah. I heard special issue of during the festival. The yeah, so in terms of cultures, I thought you were going to say Spain at the World Cup won. I thought that was your only comment. England are playing Argentina tonight. And in Ireland we're not in, so we're neutral. The yeah, so I mean a lot of research has been done. There is a great colleague in Italy. There is a intercultural education program and conference that they run every 2 years in November in Tuscany. And Ernesto Rey Marino is chair of that group. They look at intercultural empathy. And it's very interesting. The project started at the end of World War II, when there were Americans who were in Italy at the time who were conscientious objectors. Many of them were Quakers, actually, and they weren't willing to fight in World War II. But they said they trained as ambulance people, and they went around in ambulances. And at the end, they realized the importance of empathy and intercultural understanding, and they set up this network, which is still going to this day, which I think is brilliantly fun. It's absolutely delight. Apart from the fact that Tuscany is beautiful to go to, it's a delight for me to go and spend time with them. It's a great example of how they looked at cultural understanding. So we did a piece of research here in Ireland where we looked at intercultural empathy. And as I said, we used food as the model. And what we did was we had young people from 18 countries who are living in our country come and cook food and explain the food to each other. I put on about 3 kilos over 2 days, which was lovely. But you know, basically understanding food was a tool to understand families. If you understand what people eat, why they eat it, significance, what they don't like, what they do eat, you know, it was brilliant. But it's very funny. The Irish group all made Irish stew. Nobody wanted the Irish stew. That was brilliant. But given some Irish stew can be great, it's understandable. Yeah, there's a lot of I think your second question is really, really important, because I think empathy is being demeaned a lot and been exploited in research in different ways. I think I'm going to say something a bit harsh here, and I'm going to say it. I say it very respectfully to everybody, but sometimes if when you're out socially and you mention the word empathy, it evokes something in people. It can evoke something in them. you understand what I mean by that? It depends sometimes, and for whatever reason, I'm not judging people, but sometimes people then want to, and there are even people within research who want to say, look, this is nonsense, it doesn't really matter, it's weak, it's wacky, these kind of things. And I think if there's good, proper narrative and good research and good analysis, then I respect that's bona fide research. But some of the online posing as research narrative stuff around empathy is bonkers. It's crazy stuff, to be honest. And it is a real threat. Yeah, I think it's a growing threat. Because some people it gets back to something somebody said at the opening, that as social scientists, sometimes I heard lately of a colleague in UNESCO was telling me that when I was since I was student, but if somebody was doing a systematic review of the literature, they would spend time doing that and write it. Now AI would write that for you. And I'm saying that's great in one way, but it's not in another way. And similarly, AI can create an anti-empathy narrative very quickly, which is scary. Far from it is scary. Yeah. So it is true. It is a threat. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been. I don't. Yeah. The questions in, so we. Area. So say when you're.
Yes. If you'd be